I never imagined that 4 simple words could completely demolish everything I thought I knew about love, courage, and second chances. But that's exactly what happened the afternoon I met Gloria at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, when she looked me straight in the eyes and said something that would haunt me for weeks. If someone had told me that a woman's honesty could feel like both a gentle breeze and a lightning strike at the same time, I would have called them crazy. My name is Sam, and I'm 34 years old. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For most of my adult life, I've been the kind of guy who plays it safe, who colors inside the lines, who dates women his own age with predictable careers and 5-year plans that match mine perfectly. I work as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company here in Portland, live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, and until 3 months ago, my biggest relationship worry was whether to swipe left or right on dating apps. Had convinced myself that I had life figured out. Wake up, grab coffee from the same cafe, code for 8 hours, hit the gym, maybe catch up with friends on weekends, rinse and repeat. My dating life followed the same predictable pattern. Meet someone online, coffee date, dinner if the first date went well, maybe a relationship that lasted a few months before we both got bored and moved on. Nothing dramatic, nothing that kept me awake at night, nothing that made my heart race or my palms sweat. But there was this nagging feeling, this quiet voice in the back of my mind that whispered late at night when I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone. The voice that asked if this was really it, if this safe, predictable existence was all I was meant for. I pushed that voice down, buried it under work deadlines and weekend plans, convinced myself that stability was more important than passion, that comfort was better than chaos. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I woke, up to my alarm at 6:30, threw on my usual uniform of jeans and a button-down shirt, and headed to my neighborhood coffee shop for my daily dose of caffeine. The place was called Rooted, a small, cozy spot with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to linger over your laptop for hours. I had been going there for almost 2 years, knew the baristas by name, had my usual order memorized by heart. Large coffee, black, no sugar, and a blueberry muffin if I was feeling indulgent. The routine was comforting, predictable, safe. Just the way I liked it. But that Tuesday morning, my usual table by the window was occupied. A woman sat there with her back to me, her dark hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders, hunched over a sketch pad with an intensity that made me pause. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive but lived in, and I could see the edge of what appeared to be an intricate drawing spreading across the page in front of her. I ordered my coffee and looked around for another seat, but the place was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning. Students with laptops, business people having meetings, freelancers claiming tables for the long haul. Every chair was taken except for the one across from the woman at my usual table. I approached hesitantly, coffee in hand, trying to peer over her shoulder without being obvious. She was sketching a portrait of an elderly man feeding pigeons in what looked like a park setting, and the detail was breathtaking. Every line was deliberate, every shadow perfectly placed. This wasn't the work of a hobbyist. This was the work of someone with real talent, real training, real passion. "Excuse me," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you mind if I sat here? Everywhere else is taken." She looked up, and I felt something shift in my chest. Her eyes were the most striking shade of green I had ever seen, bright and intelligent, and a little sad around the edges. Her face was heart-shaped with high cheekbones, and a smile that seemed to light up from within. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something about her presence that made the busy coffee shop fade into the background. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the empty chair. "I'm just sketching. Don't mind me." Her voice had a slight rasp to it, like she had just woken up or had been laughing too hard the night before. There was something musical about the way she spoke, a rhythm that made me want to keep listening. I sat down and tried to focus on my phone, checking emails and scrolling through news articles, but I kept glancing up at her work. The sketch was incredible, capturing not just the physical details of the man, but somehow his essence, his story, his quiet dignity. "You're really talented," I said after watching her add shading to the man's weathered hands. That's beautiful work. She smiled, and I felt that shift in my chest again, stronger this time. Thank you. I used to be an art teacher before I became a freelance illustrator. Old habits die hard. I still see potential portraits everywhere I go. We started talking, and what began as polite small talk quickly became something deeper. She told me her name was Gloria, that she had moved to Portland 6 months ago for a fresh start after her divorce. I shared that I was a software engineer who had always admired artistic talent but couldn't draw a stick figure to save my life. The conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from art to travel to books to the quirky charm of Portland's coffee culture. She was witty and intelligent, with stories that made me laugh and observations that made me think. There was something magnetic about her, something that made me forget about my emails and my schedule and the predictable routine that usually governed my mornings. And then, about 30 minutes into our conversation, I made a comment that would change everything. Looking at her animated face as she described her latest illustration project, I said with a grin, "You're amazing for any age." It was meant as a compliment, a way of saying that her talent and passion transcended any conventional limitations. But the moment the words left my mouth, I saw something change in her expression. Her smile faltered slightly, and she looked down at her sketchpad. "I'm 48, she said quietly, meeting my eyes again with a vulnerability that took my breath away. Most men run when they hear that. And in that moment, sitting in a crowded coffee shop on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I realized that my predictable, safe, comfortable life was about to be turned completely upside down. To understand how profound that moment with Gloria was, you need to know who I was before I walked into that coffee shop. My life in Portland had become a carefully constructed bubble of routine and predictability, and I had convinced myself that this was exactly what happiness looked like. I moved to Portland 3 years ago from Sacramento after landing my job at TechFlow Solutions, a software development company that specialized in building custom applications for small businesses. The job paid well enough for me to afford my apartment in the Pearl District, a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Willamette River. It was the kind of place that looked great in photos and impressed dates, but never quite felt like home. My daily routine was clockwork precision. Alarm at 6:30, shower, coffee at Rooted by 7:15, at my desk by 8. I'd spend my days writing code, attending meetings and troubleshooting problems for clients who couldn't tell the difference between a browser and an operating system. Lunch was usually a sandwich at my desk while scrolling through Reddit or checking basketball scores. Home by 6:30, dinner from one of the 5 restaurants I had on rotation, maybe a Netflix show, maybe a workout at the gym in my building, bed by 10:30. Weekends followed their own predictable pattern. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, grocery shopping, laundry, maybe meeting my coworker Ben for drinks at one of the craft breweries that seemed to multiply like mushrooms after rain in this city. Sundays were for meal prep, cleaning my apartment, and that nagging anxiety that came with preparing for another week of the same routine. My dating life was just as systematic. I had profiles on 3 different apps, all with the same carefully curated photos. One professional headshot, one of me hiking at Multnomah Falls, one with my college friend Peter's golden retriever to show I was good with animals. My bio was optimized for maximum compatibility with women in their late 20s to early 30s. Software engineer who loves hiking, craft beer, and finding the best food trucks in Portland. Looking for someone to explore the Pacific Northwest with. The women I matched with were predictably similar. Marketing coordinators, graphic designers, teachers, nurses, all accomplished, all attractive, all within 5 years of my age. Our conversations followed the same script. Small talk about work, discussion of favorite restaurants, maybe some light banter about TV shows or weekend plans. First dates were always coffee or drinks, second dates were dinner. And if we made it to a third date, we might catch a movie or go to a farmer's market together. I had convinced myself this was what mature dating looked like. No drama, no games, no emotional roller coasters. Just 2 compatible adults finding common ground and building something stable together. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The problem was that none of these relationships ever made my heart race. I never found myself thinking about any of these women during my workday, never felt that electric anticipation when my phone buzzed with a text from them. My longest relationship in Portland had been with Colette, a marketing manager I met through the dating app Bumble. She was beautiful, intelligent, and shared my love of hiking and trying new restaurants. We dated for 4 months, and on paper, we were perfect for each other. But there was something missing, some spark that never quite ignited. Our conversations were pleasant but never revelatory. Our physical chemistry was fine but never passionate. We ended things amicably, agreeing that we were better as friends, though we never actually stayed in touch. Work provided its own comfortable routine. My team consisted of 5 other developers, all guys in their 20s and 30s who spoke in programming languages and comic book references. Ben, my closest friend at the company, was 32 and had been trying to convince me to get out of my comfort zone for months. "Dude, you're turning into a monk," he'd tell me over beers at Bailey's tap room. "When's the last time you did something spontaneous? When's the last time you surprised yourself?" I'd laugh off his concerns, insist that I was happy with my life, that not everyone needed to be constantly seeking adventure and excitement. But late at night, lying in my expensive bed in my picture-perfect apartment, I sometimes wondered if Ben was right. Had I traded passion for security? Had I chosen comfort over growth? My family back in Sacramento didn't help matters. My parents, both accountants who had been married for 35 years, called every Sunday to check in and not so subtly ask about my dating life. My younger sister Faith, a nurse with 2 kids and a husband she adored, was constantly trying to set me up with her friends or co-workers. "Sam, you're too picky," she'd tell me during our weekly phone calls. "You can't expect to find someone perfect. Love is about finding someone whose flaws you can live with." But that was just it. I wasn't looking for perfection. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just knew that none of the relationships I'd had in Portland felt like they were worth fighting for, worth changing my routine for, worth taking risks for. I had hobbies, interests outside of work and dating. I played in a recreational basketball league on Thursday nights, had a standing poker game with college friends once a month, and genuinely enjoyed exploring Portland's food scene. I read voraciously, mostly science fiction and biographies, and I'd been teaching myself to play guitar with YouTube videos for the past year. But even these activities felt like they existed in separate compartments of my life. Nothing connected to anything else. Nothing felt urgent or passionate or necessary. I was living life like I wrote code, methodically, efficiently, with clear inputs and predictable outputs. The morning I met Gloria, I was in the middle of what I had started, calling my autumn evaluation. It was October, and I'd been in Portland for 3 years. I had money in my savings account, a job that challenged me without overwhelming me, and an apartment that most people would envy. By any objective measure, I was successful. So why did I feel like I was sleepwalking through my own life? The silence that followed Gloria's confession stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear the espresso machine hissing in the background, the murmur of conversations from other tables, the soft jazz music filtering through the coffee shop speakers, but all of it seemed muted, distant. Her words hung in the air. "I'm 48. Most men run when they hear that." And I realized she was watching my face carefully, waiting for my reaction. I've always been told I'm easy to read, that my emotions play across my features like subtitles in a foreign film. In that moment, I was acutely aware that whatever expression I wore would either prove her point or challenge it. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to politely excuse myself, thank her for the pleasant conversation, and return to my predictable world where women came with reassuring birth dates that fell within acceptable parameters. Instead, I found myself leaning forward slightly, studying her face with new interest. 48. I did the math quickly. She was 14 years older than me, old enough to be, well, not quite old enough to be my mother, but definitely old enough to have experiences I couldn't imagine, to have lived through decades of history that were just footnotes in my textbooks. 48, I repeated, and she tensed slightly, her hand moving unconsciously to close her sketchbook. I could see her preparing to gather her things, to make a graceful exit before the inevitable awkwardness set in. "And you think that would make me run?" She let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Experience has taught me that men your age prefer their dating pool to be significantly shallower." The bitterness in her voice told a story I hadn't heard yet, spoke of encounters that had left her defensive, ready for rejection before it could wound her. I thought about the dating apps on my phone, the filters I'd set for age ranges, the automatic assumptions I'd made about compatibility based on birth years rather than actual connection. "Can I ask you something?" I said, setting down my coffee cup and giving her my full attention. "What made you decide to tell me? You could have deflected, changed the subject, or just let me assume whatever I was going to assume." She looked surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked her to examine her own honesty before. "I suppose I'm tired of pretending," she said slowly. "Tired of shaving years off my age on dating profiles. Tired of dancing around the truth. Tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you're going to be put off by my age, better to find out now before—" "Before what?" She gestured vaguely. "Between us. Before this becomes anything more than a pleasant conversation with a stranger." I leaned back in my chair, really looking at her for the first time since she'd dropped her bombshell. Her skin had the kind of luminous quality that spoke of someone who took care of herself, who ate well and stayed active and used good moisturizer. There were fine lines around her eyes, but they seemed to enhance rather than detract from her beauty, like brushstrokes that added depth to a painting. Her hands, which I could see more clearly now as she fidgeted with her pencil, were elegant and strong, with the slightly stained fingertips of someone who worked with her hands. 48, I said again, as if testing the words. "So you were born in 1975? "September 15th, 1975, she confirmed, and I could hear the pride creeping into her voice despite her obvious nervousness. "So you remember the Berlin Wall coming down. You lived through the entire grunge era. You were probably in college during the dot-com boom." I was thinking out loud, trying to wrap my mind around the timeline of her life. "You've seen more history than I have, experienced more changes, probably have perspectives I couldn't even imagine." She blinked, clearly not expecting this reaction. "Most men find that intimidating." "Most men are idiots," I said, echoing my earlier sentiment but with more conviction this time. "I mean, think about it. You've had 48 years to figure out who you are, what you want, what you won't tolerate. You're not going to play games or waste time on nonsense because you know how valuable time actually is. That's not intimidating. That's incredibly attractive." The transformation in her expression was remarkable. The defensive walls she'd erected began to lower, replaced by something that looked like cautious hope. "You really mean that?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I really mean that." She picked up her coffee cup, which had been sitting, untouched since her confession, and took a careful sip. "You know, most of the men I've met lately seem to be looking for someone to play the role of the cool girlfriend. Someone who's low maintenance, doesn't ask for much, and makes them feel young and virile. The idea of dating someone who might actually challenge them, who has her own established life and opinions and expectations, seems terrifying." "Maybe you've been meeting the wrong men," I suggested. She laughed, and this time there was genuine amusement in it. "Maybe I have been." She paused, studying my face. "Can I ask you something now?" "Shoot." "What's a 34-year-old software engineer doing having coffee with a 48-year-old divorced illustrator on a Tuesday morning? Shouldn't you be at work writing code or attending meetings or whatever it is you tech people do?" I glanced at my watch and realized with a start that it was already 8:15. I was supposed to be at my desk by 8, but for the first time in 3 years I didn't care about being late. "I should be," I admitted, "but this seems more important right now." "This?" I gestured between us, the same motion she'd made earlier. "This conversation, this moment, this feeling that something interesting is about to happen." Her eyes widened slightly. "And what feeling is that?" I thought about how to articulate the electricity I felt in the air, the sense that my carefully ordered world had just shifted on its axis. The feeling that maybe everything I thought I knew about what I wanted is about to be proven completely wrong. Gloria set down her coffee cup and smiled, really smiled. for the first time since I'd sat down. Now that, she said, sounds like the beginning of a very interesting story. What happened next defied every rule I'd unconsciously created about first encounters. Instead of the polite small talk that usually filled my coffee dates, Gloria and I dove headfirst into the kind of conversation I'd forgotten was possible. She opened her sketchbook again, this time without the defensive hesitation, and showed me drawing after drawing that revealed not just her artistic talent, but glimpses into how she saw the world. "This is Mrs. Chen from the flower shop on Division," she said, pointing to a portrait of an elderly Asian woman arranging roses. "She's been married for 63 years, and every morning her husband brings her coffee in the same chipped blue mug. She told me they've never spent a night apart, except when their children were born." I studied the drawing, amazed by how she'd captured not just the woman's physical features, but something deeper, the contentment in her smile, the practiced ease of her movements. "You got all that from just watching her?" "I got that from talking to her," Gloria corrected. "People love to share their stories if you're genuinely interested in hearing them. I've learned more about love and loss and resilience sitting in coffee shops and parks with my sketchbook than I ever did in my marriage." The casual mention of her marriage hung in the air, and I found myself curious rather than uncomfortable. "How long were you married?" 18 years, she said, turning to a fresh page and unconsciously beginning to sketch as we talked. "Met my ex-husband in college. Married at 24, divorced at 42. He was a good man, is a good man, but we grew into different people. He wanted safety and routine, and I wanted more." I watched her pencil move across the paper, creating what appeared to be a rough outline of the coffee shop around us. "What kind of more?" "Adventure, creativity, conversations that lasted past midnight because we forgot to check the time, the feeling that each day might surprise me." She glanced up from her drawing. "What about you? Ever been married?" "No," I admitted. "I've had a few serious relationships, but nothing that felt like forever. I always thought I was being smart, taking my time, making sure I found the right person. And now?" I considered her question, surprised by my own honesty when I answered. "Now I'm wondering if I was just being scared." She smiled at that, and I realized I was becoming addicted to the way her face lit up when she was pleased. Fear, masquerading as prudence. I know that dance well. As the morning progressed, I learned that Gloria had been an art teacher for 15 years, before her divorce prompted her to try freelance illustration. She'd moved to Portland because she'd always loved the city's creative energy, and because she wanted to start over somewhere that felt like possibility rather than obligation. "I teach art classes twice a week at the community center," she told me. "Mostly adults who've convinced themselves they can't draw. My favorite students are the ones who come in terrified and leave covered in paint and grinning like children." "That sounds incredible," I said, and meant it. "I've always envied people who could create something beautiful from nothing." "You create things," she pointed out. "Software, applications, solutions to problems. That's a form of art too." I'd never thought of my work that way, but hearing her describe it made me see coding in a different light. "I suppose it is. Though, my creations are pretty invisible to most people." "The best art often is," she said. "The bridge that doesn't collapse, the app that makes someone's day easier, the perfectly timed joke that lifts someone's spirits. Not all masterpieces hang in galleries." I found myself telling her things I'd never shared with anyone. How I'd wanted to write novels in college but convinced myself it wasn't practical. How I sometimes lay awake at night wondering if I was wasting my life on safe choices. How I'd moved to Portland hoping the change of scenery would somehow change me too. "And has it?" she asked. "Changed you?" I looked around the coffee shop, at the other patrons absorbed in their laptops and conversations, at the barista drawing leaf, patterns and foam, at this remarkable woman who'd somehow made me forget I was supposed to be at work an hour ago. "Ask me again in a few weeks." She laughed, closing her sketchbook and tucking her pencil behind her ear. "I have to go," she said, glancing at her phone. "I have a client meeting at 10. The thought of her leaving created an unexpected panic in my chest. Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? I know this great little place that does amazing seafood, or if you prefer Italian, Sam, she interrupted gently, and my heart sank. Sure, she was about to let me down easy. I'd love to have dinner with you, but I should probably mention that I don't do casual dating anymore. At 48, I don't have time for games or uncertainty. If we're going to do this, I need to know you're genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just curious about what it's like to date an older woman. Her directness was both refreshing and terrifying. In my previous relationships, intentions were implied, feelings were hinted at, and no one ever said exactly what they meant. I'm genuinely interested, I said, surprised by how sure I sounded. In getting to know you, I mean, all of you. She studied my face for a long moment, then smiled. Then yes, I'd very much like to have dinner with you. Our first dinner together happened 3 days later, at a small Italian restaurant in the Alberta Arts District. I'd chosen the place carefully. Intimate enough for real conversation, but not so romantic that it would feel like I was trying too hard. When Gloria walked in wearing a flowing burgundy dress and a leather jacket that had clearly seen years of adventures, I felt that same electric jolt I'd experienced in the coffee shop. "You clean up nice," she said with a smile that made me grateful I'd spent 20 minutes deciding between shirts. "You look incredible," I replied, and meant it. There was something about the way she carried herself, a confidence that seemed to radiate from within, that made every other woman in the restaurant fade into the background. We ordered wine. She chose a bold Cabernet that she said reminded her of a trip to Tuscany she'd taken alone after her divorce, and settled into the kind of conversation that felt like discovering a secret room in a house you thought you knew completely. "Can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" she asked after we'd shared stories about our worst dating experiences, laughing until my sides hurt at her. Tale of a man who'd brought his mother on their second date. After the day I've had, I'm pretty sure nothing would sound crazy. She swirled her wine, looking suddenly vulnerable. When I was married, I used to have this recurring dream. I'd dream that I was standing in front of a canvas, paintbrush in hand, ready to create something magnificent. But every time I tried to paint, the brush would come out gray, no matter what color I dipped it in. Everything I tried to create was just gray. I leaned forward, captivated by the raw honesty in her voice. "I stopped having that dream about 6 months after my divorce," she continued. "But last night, after meeting you, I dreamed I was painting again. And this time, the colors were so vivid they practically glowed off the canvas. Reds like fire, blues like the deepest ocean, greens like spring after a long winter." The vulnerability in her confession made my chest tight. "What do you think it means?" "I think it means I'd forgotten what it felt like to be excited about something," she said softly. "About someone. For the last few years, I've been so focused on rebuilding my life, on proving to myself and everyone else that I could be okay alone, that I'd convinced myself excitement was a luxury I couldn't afford." I reached across the table and took her hand, surprised by my own boldness. "And now?" "Now I'm terrified," she admitted, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Because I know what it's like to lose something that matters. I know how much it hurts when the person you trust with your heart decides you're not worth the effort anymore." Her words hit deeper than I expected. "Is that what happened? He decided you weren't worth it?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at our joined hands. "We both did, I think. Marriage became a habit instead of a choice. We stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other, and started just going through the motions. He'd come home from work, I'd have dinner ready, we'd watch TV and go to bed. Weekends were about chores and obligations. We were like roommates who occasionally had sex." The brutal honesty of her words made me think about my own patterns, my own tendency to let relationships settle into comfortable routines instead of continuing to nurture them. "I don't want that again," she continued. "I don't want safe if it means slowly dying inside. I don't want comfortable if it means giving up the parts of myself that make me feel alive." "What do you want?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. She looked directly into my eyes, and I felt like she could see straight through to my soul. "I want someone who will still surprise me after we've been together for years. Someone who will dance with me in the kitchen at midnight because a good song came on the radio. Someone who will look at my art and understand that it's not just a hobby, it's how I breathe." She paused, vulnerability and strength warring in her expression. I want someone who will grow with me instead of growing away from me. And Sam, I need you to know that if you're looking for easy, for someone who will just fit seamlessly into your existing life without asking you to change or stretch or become more than you already are, then I'm not the right person for you. The weight of her words settled between us like a challenge. She wasn't just telling me what she wanted. She was asking me to examine what I was willing to give, what I was brave enough to risk. What if I told you that I've been sleepwalking through my life for the past 3 years? I said finally. What if I told you that meeting you feels like waking up for the first time since I moved to Portland? Her grip on my hand tightened. Then I'd say that sounds like the beginning of something real. Something real, I repeated, testing the words. That sounds terrifying. The best things usually are, she said, raising her wine glass. To being terrified together, I clinked my glass against hers, feeling like I was toasting not just our connection, but the end of my old life and the beginning of something I couldn't yet imagine, but desperately wanted to discover. The first crack in our perfect bubble appeared, exactly 1 week after our dinner at the Italian restaurant. I was sitting at my desk at TechFlow, trying to focus on debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code, when Ben rolled his chair over with that expression he got when he was about to deliver unsolicited advice. "So I heard through the grapevine that you've been seen around town with an older woman," he said without preamble, his voice carrying that mixture of curiosity and concern that made my stomach tighten. "Grapevine?" I asked, not looking up from my screen. "Portland's a small city, man, especially in our circles. My girlfriend Olivia saw you at that Italian place on Alberta last week. She said the woman you were with was stunning, but—" He trailed off, clearly fishing for information. But what? I forced myself to sound casual, though I could feel the defensive walls going up. But she looked significantly older than your usual type. Like, significantly. Ben leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "I'm not judging, I'm just curious. Are we talking about a Mrs. Robinson situation here, or something more serious?" The casual way he reduced Gloria to a stereotype made anger flare in my chest. "Her name is Gloria. She's an artist. And what we have is none of your business." Ben held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, defensive much? I'm just looking out for you, dude. You've been different lately. Distracted. You were late 3 times last week, which isn't like you at all." He wasn't wrong about the distraction. Since meeting Gloria, I'd found it increasingly difficult to care about sprint planning meetings and code reviews. My mind kept wandering to our conversations, to the way she laughed at my terrible jokes, to the sketch she'd drawn of me during our second coffee date that somehow captured something in my expression I'd never seen before. "Different isn't necessarily bad," I said, finally turning to face him. "Look, I get it. Older women can be exciting. They know what they want, they're experienced, probably grateful for the attention. But have you thought about the long-term implications? What happens when you're 50 and she's 64? What happens if you want kids?" Each question felt like a small punch to the gut, not because they were unfair, but because they were the same questions that had started creeping into my own mind during quiet moments. I'd pushed them aside, telling myself that Gloria and I were still figuring things out, that it was too early to worry about such distant concerns. But hearing them voiced by someone else made them impossible to ignore. The second complication arrived that evening in the form of a phone call from my sister Faith. She'd somehow heard about Gloria from our mutual friend Peter, who lived in Portland, and had apparently spotted us at the farmer's market the previous Saturday. "Sam, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," Faith said without preamble after we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. "Are you having some kind of midlife crisis?" "I'm 34, Faith. That's a little early for a midlife crisis. You know what I mean. Peter said this woman looked like she could be your mother. He said she had gray in her hair and everything." I felt the familiar surge of protectiveness I'd experienced with Ben. "She has silver streaks in her hair, and they're beautiful. And she's 48, not 80. 48? Faith's voice rose an octave. "Sam, that's 14 years older than you. When you were in high school, she was already married with a career. Don't you think that's a little inappropriate?" "Inappropriate?" I repeated, incredulous. "2 consenting adults having dinner together is inappropriate?" "You know that's not what I mean. I'm worried about you, Sam. This isn't like you. You've always been so practical about relationships, so thoughtful about compatibility. What happens when your friends start having kids and settling down, and you're dealing with her menopause? The bluntness of her question took my breath away. I'd never heard Faith sound so judgmental, so willing to reduce a person to biological functions and age-related assumptions. But the worst part was that her words echoed doubts I'd been trying to suppress. What would it be like to navigate the social dynamics of being with someone who was at a completely different life stage? How would I fit into her world of divorce recovery and established friendships and artistic communities where I'd be the young boyfriend? The third blow came from an unexpected source. Gloria herself. She called me that Friday night, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Sam, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react, she said. My ex-husband John reached out to me today. He wants to have coffee. He says there are things we need to discuss about our divorce settlement, but... She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. But I think he might want to try again. To reconcile. The silence stretched between us across the phone line, filled with all the complications and uncertainties that had been building around us like storm clouds. What do you want to do? I asked finally, though I wasn't sure I was ready for her answer. I don't know, she admitted, and those 3 words felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet. Despite the growing chorus of doubt from friends and family, Gloria and I made a conscious decision to lean into our connection rather than away from it. The weekend after her ex-husband's phone call, she invited me to join her at one of her art classes at the community center, and I said yes without hesitation, even though the idea of being surrounded by her students and colleagues made my palms sweat. The North Portland Community Center was a converted warehouse, with high ceilings and paint-splattered floors that spoke of countless creative sessions. When we walked into the studio together, I immediately felt the curious glances of the dozen or so adults gathered around easels, their ages ranging from what looked like early 20s to late 70s. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sam, Gloria announced with a confidence that both impressed and terrified me. He's going to be observing today, maybe even participating if we can convince him to pick up a brush. An elderly woman with paint already streaked across her smock looked up from her canvas with a knowing smile. Well, well. So this is the young man we've been hearing about. I felt my cheeks burn, but Gloria just laughed. Sam, meet Dolores. She's been coming to my classes for 6 months and has absolutely no filter. None whatsoever, Dolores confirmed cheerfully. Life's too short to pretend we don't notice when our art teacher starts glowing like a teenager with a crush. As the class progressed, I watched Gloria transform. The slight defensiveness she sometimes carried when we were out in public melted away completely as she moved between students, offering gentle guidance and enthusiastic encouragement. She had a gift for seeing what each person was trying to achieve and helping them get there without taking over their vision. Your turn, she said, appearing at my shoulder with a palette of colors and a brush. I want you to paint how you're feeling right now. I don't know how to paint feelings, I protested, but she was already guiding me to an empty easel. There's no wrong way, she said softly, her hand briefly touching my back. Just let the brush move and see what happens. What happened was messy, and abstract, and probably terrible by any objective standard. But as I mixed blues and greens and somehow created something that looked like movement, like energy, I began to understand why Gloria talked about art as breathing. There was something meditative about the process, something that quieted the anxious voices in my head. That's beautiful, said a woman named Colette who was working on a landscape at the next easel. It looks like joy, if joy were a color. After class, Gloria and I walked to a nearby cafe, my hands still faintly stained with paint. Thank you for letting me be part of that, I said. Your students adore you. They're good people, she replied. Most of them came to class convinced they couldn't create anything worthwhile, and now look at them. Dolores is planning her first art show. Marcus over there has started painting portraits of his grandchildren. Art gives people permission to surprise themselves. That evening, we had our first real conversation about the elephant in the room, her coffee date with John, which was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I need you to know that I'm not meeting him because I'm having second thoughts about us, she said as we sat on her apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city lights twinkle below. I'm meeting him because I need closure. because there are practical things we need to discuss, and because I want to be absolutely certain that the door to that chapter of my life is truly closed. Are you certain? I asked, trying to keep the vulnerability out of my voice. She turned to face me fully, her green eyes serious in the dim light. Sam, I spent 18 years with John. We built a life together, shared dreams, weathered storms. The love I had for him was real and deep and important, but it was also safe and predictable, and ultimately limiting. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. What I feel for you is completely different. It's terrifying and exhilarating and unpredictable. You make me want to take risks I'd forgotten I was capable of taking. You see me not as the wife I used to be or the age I am, but as the woman I'm becoming. I squeezed her hand, feeling some of the tension I'd been carrying since her phone call begin to ease. I've never felt this way about anyone, I admitted. It scares the hell out of me. But I don't want to go back to my old life. I don't want to go back to sleepwalking. Then don't, she said simply. Whatever challenges come up, whatever people say, whatever complications arise, let's promise to face them together, instead of letting them drive us apart. Together, I agreed. And when she leaned over to kiss me, I tasted wine and possibility, and the kind of hope I'd thought only existed in movies. Later that night, as I held her in my arms, I realized that for the first time since meeting her, I wasn't worried about the age difference or what other people thought. I was just grateful to have found someone who made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Someone who challenged me to be braver and more honest and more alive than I'd ever been before. The week leading up to Gloria's coffee date with John felt like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. Every conversation we had seemed to dance around the unspoken tension, and I found myself analyzing her every word and expression for signs of doubt or second thoughts. The pressure from my social circle intensified as well. At our regular Thursday night basketball game, my teammate Peter pulled me aside during a water break, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. Look, Sam, I like you, man. You're a good guy. But I have to ask, what are you really doing with this woman? He bounced the basketball absently, the sound echoing off the gym walls. I've been thinking about it since I saw you two together, and I can't figure out what you're getting out of this besides some kind of ego boost. Ego boost? I repeated, feeling my jaw clench. Come on, you know what I mean. Older woman, grateful for the attention, probably makes you feel like a stud. But what happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when you want to start a family? And she's going through menopause? The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. You don't know anything about Gloria, I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. I know she's old enough to be settling down for the long haul while you're just figuring out what you want from life, Peter shot back. I know that when my friends start having kids and buying houses and building careers, you're going to be dealing with someone else's midlife crisis. That night, I couldn't sleep. Peter's words echoed in my mind, mixing with Ben's concerns and Faith's judgmental questions to create a symphony of doubt that made my chest feel tight with anxiety. I found myself doing the math obsessively. When I was 40, she'd be 54. When I was 50, she'd be 64. The numbers felt stark and unforgiving in the darkness of my bedroom. Work became another source of stress. My performance had been slipping, my attention divided between debugging code and checking my phone for messages from Gloria. During a team meeting on Monday, our project manager called me out directly. Sam, you've been distracted lately. The Johnson account deployment was delayed because of bugs that should have been caught in testing. This isn't like you. Is everything okay? I mumbled something about personal stress and promised to do better. But I could feel my colleagues' eyes on me, could sense the shift in how they perceived my reliability. The career I'd worked so hard to build suddenly felt precarious, threatened by my inability to compartmentalize my emotions the way I always had before. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Gloria texted me at 7 a.m. Coffee with John at 10. We'll call you afterward. Thinking of you. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, analyzing every word choice, every punctuation mark, trying to read between the lines for clues about her emotional state. Thinking of you. Was that reassurance or farewell? Was she having second thoughts? Had John already reached out with some compelling argument for reconciliation? At work, I was a disaster. I accidentally deleted an entire day's worth of code. Changes, mixed up client requirements in an email that had to be awkwardly retracted, and snapped at Ben when he asked if I wanted to grab lunch. "Dude, what is going on with you?" Ben demanded, following me to the break room. "You're acting like someone whose girlfriend is about to dump him for her ex-husband." The accuracy of his assessment made me want to punch something. "She's not going to dump me," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Are you sure about that?" Ben leaned against the counter, his expression softening slightly. "Look, I know I've been giving you grief about this whole situation, but I genuinely care about you. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're putting yourself through hell for someone who's still hung up on her ex." "She's not hung up on him," I protested, but even as I said it, I realized I wasn't entirely certain. How well did I really know Gloria? We'd been seeing each other for less than a month. Maybe this intense connection I felt was one-sided. Maybe I was just a distraction, a way for her to feel young and desirable while she figured out whether she wanted to rebuild her marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Faith. "Called Mom and Dad about your situation. They're worried. Maybe you should come home for the weekend and get some perspective." The idea that my family was now involved, that they were worried about my choices, made the walls feel like they were closing in. Everyone in my life seemed to have an opinion about my relationship with Gloria, and none of those opinions were supportive. By 3 o'clock, I still hadn't heard from Gloria. Her coffee date should have been over hours ago. I tried to focus on work, but every minute that passed without contact felt like confirmation of my worst fears. Maybe John had made a compelling case for their shared history. Maybe he'd reminded her of all the practical reasons why reconciling made sense. When my phone finally rang at 4:30, I nearly jumped out of my chair. "Sam?" Gloria's voice came through the phone, but something was wrong. She sounded tired, distant, like she was calling from the bottom of a well. "Can we talk? I'm at Pioneer Courthouse Square. Could you meet me here?" The formality in her tone made my stomach drop. This wasn't the warm, intimate voice I'd grown accustomed to hearing. This was the voice of someone preparing to deliver bad news. "I'll be right there," I said, already grabbing my jacket and heading for the elevator. The 20-minute drive to downtown felt like an eternity. Traffic seemed deliberately slow, every red light lasting forever, every pedestrian crossing the street with maddening leisure. I found myself gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, running through every possible scenario in my mind. None of them ended well. I spotted Gloria sitting alone on one of the stone steps near the square's center, her sketchbook closed beside her, staring at the fountain with an expression I couldn't read from a distance. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like something vital had been drained out of her during the hours since her coffee with John. "Hey," I said softly as I approached, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and I saw immediately that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mascara slightly smudged despite obvious attempts to repair it. "Hi," she said, managing a weak smile that broke my heart. "Thanks for coming." I sat down beside her, leaving a careful space between us that felt like a chasm. "How did it go?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the fountain cycle through its patterns. "He wants to try again," she said finally. "John wants to reconcile. He's been thinking about us, about our marriage, and he believes we gave up too easily." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. "And what do you think?" "I think," she started, then stopped, pressing her lips together as if trying to hold back words that wanted to escape. "I think he made some valid points about our history together, about the life we built, about the practicality of starting over at my age." Each word felt like a small knife to my chest. Practicality. "Sam, please don't make this harder than it already is." Her voice cracked slightly. "John and I have 18 years of shared experience. We own property together. We have mutual friends. We understand each other's families. We have a foundation. And us?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "What do we have?" She turned to look at me then, and the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "We have intensity. We have chemistry. We have this incredible connection that feels like lightning in a bottle. But Sam, I'm 48 years old. I can't afford to make decisions based purely on emotion anymore. The careful distance between us on the steps suddenly felt symbolic of everything that was about to fall apart. So you're choosing him. I'm choosing stability, she corrected, but her voice was hollow. I'm choosing the path that makes sense, that doesn't require me to navigate disapproving families and skeptical friends and questions about what happens when you want children, and I'm going through menopause. The specificity of her concerns told me that our conversations about external pressures had affected her more than she'd let on. Those aren't my concerns, I said desperately. Those are other people's concerns. But they become your concerns. Eventually, she said, finally meeting my eyes. They have to. And I can't bear the thought of watching you slowly realize that everyone was right, that this was a mistake, that you could have had a simpler life with someone more appropriate. More appropriate, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. You mean younger. I mean compatible with your life stage, your goals, your future. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. John made me realize that I've been selfish, asking you to take on complications that shouldn't be your burden. The resignation in her voice was what finally broke me. So that's it? You're just going to throw away what we have because other people don't understand it? I'm protecting what we have, she said fiercely, and for a moment, fire flashed in her eyes. I'm protecting you from the mess of my life, from the complexity of dating someone who comes with so much baggage. I'm protecting both of us from the inevitable moment when this stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling like a mistake. I stood up abruptly, anger and heartbreak warring in my chest. You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle. Sam, no, listen to me. I was pacing now, my voice rising despite the public setting. For the past month, you've been telling me about choosing authenticity over safety, about not settling for gray when you could have color. And now you're doing exactly what you said you'd never do again. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. It's not that simple. It is that simple, I said, though even as I spoke, I could feel the certainty crumbling inside me. Either what we have is worth fighting for, or it isn't. The silence stretched between us like a bridge burning. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Sam. I'm so sorry. I walked away from Pioneer Courthouse Square, in a daze, leaving Gloria sitting on those stone steps with her closed sketchbook and her practical decision. The city moved around me in a blur of honking cars and chattering pedestrians, but I felt completely disconnected from all of it, like I was watching my life through thick glass. For 3 days, I did exactly what everyone expected me to do. I threw myself back into work with the kind of desperate focus that impressed my colleagues and worried my friends. I debugged code with mechanical precision, attended meetings where I nodded at appropriate intervals, and responded to emails with professional efficiency. I was the perfect picture of a man who had come to his senses and returned to his orderly, predictable life. Ben watched me with concerned curiosity. You seem different, he said on Thursday afternoon, rolling his chair over to my desk. More like your old self, but also kind of like a robot. I'm fine, I replied automatically, not looking up from my screen. Just focused. Right, Ben said slowly. And the older woman situation? Resolved, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the river view that had once seemed so impressive. The space felt sterile, empty, like a hotel room where I happened to sleep rather than a home. I ordered Thai food from my usual place, watched a Netflix series I'd seen twice before, and went to bed at exactly 10:30, just like in the old days. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay in the darkness thinking about Gloria's words, about the fear I'd heard beneath her practical reasons, about the way she'd looked when she said she was protecting us both from inevitable disappointment. The more I replayed our conversation, the angrier I became, not just at her but at myself. I was angry at myself for not fighting harder in that moment, for walking away instead of challenging her decision more forcefully. I was angry at myself for letting other people's opinions creep into my own head, for allowing their doubts to become my doubts. Most of all, I was angry at myself for being so concerned with what everyone else thought that I'd forgotten to ask what I actually wanted. The realization hit me at 3 in the morning as I stood in my kitchen drinking water and staring out at the city lights. I was about to make the same mistake Gloria was making. I was about to choose safety over authenticity, comfort over growth, other people's approval over my own happiness. Friday night, I called my sister Faith. "Sam," she answered on the second ring, her voice bright with relief. "I'm so glad you called. Mom said she hadn't heard from you since that conversation about your situation. How are you doing?" "I need to tell you something," I said without preamble. "And I need you to listen without interrupting." "Okay," she said cautiously. "I'm in love with Gloria. Not infatuated, not confused, not having a midlife crisis. I'm in love with her intelligence, her passion, her courage, her honesty. I'm in love with the way she sees the world and the way she challenges me to see it differently. I'm in love with who I am when I'm with her." Faith was quiet for a moment. "Sam, I'm not finished," I interrupted. "For the past month, everyone has been telling me what's wrong with this relationship. The age difference, the complications, the impracticality. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe it will be complicated. Maybe we'll face challenges that other couples don't have to deal with." I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside my chest. "But I'd rather face those challenges with someone who makes me feel alive than spend the rest of my life in a safe, appropriate relationship that bores me to death." The silence stretched between us before Faith spoke again, her voice softer. "Do you really love her, Sam? Or do you love how she makes you feel about yourself?" It was a fair question, and I considered it carefully. "Both," I admitted. "She makes me want to be braver, more honest, more open to possibility. But I also love her. Her art, her stories, her laugh, the way she gets excited about teaching someone to see color differently. I love her independently of how she affects me, and she chose her ex-husband. She chose fear," I corrected. "She chose what other people told her made sense instead of what her heart was telling her. And I let her do it because I was scared too. So what are you going to do?" I looked around my perfectly organized apartment, at the life I'd built that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow from within. I'm going to fight for her. I'm going to fight for us. I'm going to show her that love isn't about choosing the easy path. It's about choosing the person worth taking the difficult path with. "Sam," Faith said gently, "what if she doesn't want to be fought for? What if she's genuinely happier with her ex-husband?" "Then I'll respect that decision," I said. "But I won't respect a decision made out of fear. I won't let the best thing that ever happened to me slip away because we were both too scared to disappoint other people." After I hung up, I sat down at my laptop and began to write. Not code this time, but words. A letter to Gloria that said everything I should have said on those courthouse steps. Everything I'd been too shocked and hurt to articulate in the moment. I wrote about love and fear, about choosing growth over comfort, about the difference between practical decisions and cowardly ones. I wrote until the sun came up, until my fingers ached and my heart felt raw but clear. Then I printed the letter, put on my jacket, and headed out to find her. I found Gloria at the community center on Saturday morning, setting up for her art class despite the fact that it was her day off. Through the window, I could see her arranging easels with mechanical precision, her movements lacking the fluid grace I'd grown accustomed to watching. She looked like she was going through the motions of her life the same way I had been going through the motions of mine. I stood outside for several minutes, the letter heavy in my jacket pocket, watching her and gathering the courage for what might be our final conversation. When I finally pushed through the door, the sound made her look up, and the expression that crossed her face was a complicated mixture of hope and pain. "Sam," she said softly, setting down the easel she'd been adjusting. "What are you doing here?" "I came to tell you that I think you're making a mistake," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "And I came to tell you that I'm not going to let you make it without hearing what I have to say." She wrapped her arms around herself defensively. "Sam, we talked about this. I've made my decision." "You made a decision based on fear," I said, pulling the letter from my pocket. "You made a decision based on what other people think instead of what you feel. You made a decision that goes against everything you told me about choosing color over gray. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I unfolded the letter, my hands surprisingly steady. Gloria, I spent 3 days trying to convince myself that everyone was right, that we were impractical, that I should be grateful to escape the complications of loving you. And you know what I realized? She didn't answer, but she didn't tell me to leave either. I realized that I don't want an uncomplicated life. I don't want safe and predictable and appropriate. I want you. I want your art and your passion and your stories about 63-year marriages and learning to see color differently. I want your laugh lines and your silver streaks and your complete inability to pretend you're something you're not. My voice was getting stronger with each word, more certain. I want to fight about important things and make up in ways that matter. I want to travel to places that scare us both and come home to someone who challenges me to be better than I was the day before. I want to grow old with someone who's already figured out that growing old isn't something to be afraid of. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but she still hadn't moved from behind the easel she was gripping like a shield. But most of all, I continued, I want to be with someone who's brave enough to choose love even when it's terrifying, even when other people don't understand it, even when it means disappointing the people who think they know what's best for us. Sam, stop, she whispered, but there was no force behind the words. I'm not going to stop, I said firmly. Because you taught me something important about myself, Gloria. You taught me that I'd been sleepwalking through my life, settling for good enough when I could have had extraordinary. You taught me that the right person doesn't make your life easier. They make it richer, more challenging, more worth living. I took a step closer to her. So I need to know, when you're with John, do you feel alive? When you wake up next to him, do you feel excited about the day ahead? When you look in the mirror, do you see someone who's living authentically, or someone who's playing it safe? The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. When Gloria finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I haven't gone back to him, she said, and my heart stopped. I told him I needed time to think, but I couldn't. Why not? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. She let go of the easel and sank into one of the plastic chairs scattered around the room. Because every time I tried to imagine my life with him again, all I could think about was you. Because when I close my eyes, I don't see 18 years of shared history. I see you laughing at my terrible art puns and trying to paint feelings you didn't know you had. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Because I've been lying to myself about why I was considering going back to him. It wasn't about practicality or stability or shared history. It was about terror. Pure, absolute terror at the thought of loving someone enough to risk having my heart broken again. I knelt down in front of her chair, taking her hands in mine. And now, she looked into my eyes, and I saw the exact moment when her fear transformed into something else. Not the absence of fear, but courage in spite of it. Now, I think I'd rather have my heart broken by someone extraordinary than live safely with someone ordinary, she said, her voice growing stronger. Now I think maybe the risk is worth it if the person is worth it. And am I? I asked. Worth it? She smiled through her tears, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Sam, you're worth everything. 6 months later, I was standing in Gloria's art studio, watching her prepare for her first solo exhibition in over 20 years. Canvases lined the walls in various stages of completion, each one more vibrant and alive than anything she'd created during our early coffee shop meetings. The woman who had once dreamed in gray was now painting in colors so bold they seemed to pulse with their own energy. Hand me that brush, she said, without looking up from the canvas she was working on, completely absorbed in adding final touches to a piece she'd titled, Courage at 34. It was a portrait of a man, recognizably me, but somehow more confident than I'd ever seen myself, standing at the edge of a cliff with his arms spread wide, ready to jump. Are you sure you want to include this one in the show? I asked, passing her the brush. It's pretty personal. She paused in her painting and turned to smile at me. Paint streaked across her cheek in a way that made my heart skip exactly the way it had 6 months ago. The personal pieces are the ones that matter most, she said. Besides, this painting tells a story about transformation, about choosing growth over safety. That's what this whole exhibition is about. The exhibition, titled Second Chances, was scheduled to open the following weekend at a small but respected gallery in the Pearl District. Word had already spread through Portland's tight-knit art community, and advance sales had exceeded everyone's expectations. Gloria was nervous and excited in equal measure, but mostly she was proud. Proud of the work, proud of her courage to put herself out there again, proud of the life she'd chosen to build. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had expected. The intensity of our early connection had deepened into something more sustainable, but no less passionate. We'd learned to navigate the practical challenges that everyone had warned us about, finding solutions that worked for us rather than letting other people's concerns dictate our choices. The age difference that had seemed so significant in the beginning had become just another fact about us, like my love of terrible action movies or her habit of singing off-key in the shower. We'd faced the skeptical questions from friends and family by simply living our lives authentically, showing rather than telling that our connection was real and lasting. "I have something to tell you," Gloria said, setting down her brush and wiping her hands on the paint-stained apron she wore like armor. "John stopped by yesterday while you were at work." My stomach tightened slightly, old insecurities flickering to life. "Oh? He wanted to see the paintings," she continued, watching my face carefully. "He'd heard about the exhibition through mutual friends, and he was curious. We talked for about an hour." "And?" I prompted, working to keep my voice neutral. "And he told me he's seeing someone new, a woman he met at his book club who makes him laugh and challenges him to try new things. He said she's helping him remember parts of himself he'd forgotten existed." Gloria smiled. "He thanked me." "Thanked you?" "For not taking the easy way out. For forcing him to really examine what he wanted instead of just defaulting to what was familiar." She reached for my hands, her fingers still warm from holding the brush. "He said watching me choose courage over comfort inspired him to do the same thing." I felt something relax in my chest that I hadn't even realized was still tense. "How does that make you feel?" "Happy for him," she said without hesitation. "Relieved that we both ended up where we needed to be. Grateful that we were brave enough to let go of something good so we could find something better." That evening, we had dinner with my parents, who were visiting from Sacramento. It was the third time they'd met Gloria, and each visit had gone more smoothly than the last. My mother, who had initially been concerned about the age difference, now spent most of the meal asking Gloria for art recommendations and life advice. No," my father said as we shared dessert. "When Sam first told us about you, I'll admit I had some reservations. But watching you two together, seeing how happy he is, how grounded and purposeful he's become, I realize I was thinking about it all wrong." "How so?" Gloria asked. "I was worried about the challenges you might face because of your age difference," he continued. "But every couple faces challenges. The question isn't whether you'll have obstacles, it's whether you'll face them together." As we walked home through the quiet Portland streets, Gloria slipped her hand into mine. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing the complicated path?" I thought about my old life, the predictable routines, the safe relationships, the feeling of marking time rather than living it. I thought about the man I'd been 6 months ago, sleepwalking through days that blended together in comfortable mediocrity. "Never," I said, and meant it completely. "This is the first time in my life that I've felt like I'm actually living instead of just existing." She squeezed my hand. "Even when people stare at us like we're some kind of curiosity?" "Especially then," I said, stopping to kiss her under a streetlight. "Because it means we're doing something worth noticing." We'd learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life. It's about finding someone worth reshaping your life around. It's about choosing each other every day, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. As we reached her apartment, Gloria turned to me with that same mischievous smile I'd fallen in love with in a coffee shop 6 months ago. "Ready for the next adventure?" she asked. "With you?" I replied. "Always." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.